When I moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood, nestled between two sleepy cul-de-sacs with tree-lined streets and squeaky-clean sidewalks, I thought I'd found peace. I had just finished remodeling the inside of my modest two-story home and finally had enough save to tackle my backyard. Privacy was a luxury I'd gone without for years in rentals and cramped apartments. So, the moment I closed on my first house, my dream was to build a high, sturdy wooden fence around the property, one that would let my dog roam free without me worrying about nosy neighbors or stray kids wandering in. But what I didn't know was that this simple act of independence would pit me against the most unhinged, tyrannical neighbor I had ever encountered. Her name was Karen, and not just any Karen, but the president of our neighborhood's HOA, and a woman hell-bent on turning every square inch of the neighborhood into her personal kingdom. The first time I met Karen was at the mailbox cluster on a sunny Monday morning, a week after I moved in. She practically cornered me while I was sifting through junk mail and introduced herself with a smile so fake it made my skin crawl. Her bleach blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her yoga pants were spotless, and her eyes scanned me like I was a scratch on her brand-new Tesla. She spoke fast, mostly about herself. She'd lived in a neighborhood for 8 years, had been elected HOA president 5 times in a row, and just wanted everything to look clean and uniform. Her tone darkened when she mentioned the rules and how some people thought they didn't apply to them. I smiled politely, chalked it up to suburban politics, and went on with my day. But that was the beginning of something much, much worse. 2 weeks later, I submitted a formal request to the HOA to build a fence. I had done my homework. I pulled the neighborhood regulation from the community portal, found the exact section that covered fencing, and made sure every detail, height, materials, distance from the sidewalk, was exactly within code. I even included a sketch, photos of similar fences already built in the neighborhood, and a copy of the permit I'd obtained from the city. I dropped the packet off with the HOA secretary, received a receipt, and got confirmation in writing that my request was approved. With that green light, I called the contractors and scheduled the work. That's when the weirdness started. The day after the wooden posts were cemented into the ground, I noticed someone had pulled them all out of alignment. At first, I thought it was kids, maybe a prank. But then I found small notes stapled to each post that read, "Unauthorized structure. Remove immediately." No name, no logo, no official anything. Just those words in all caps, printed in Times New Roman, and stapled sloppily like some deranged vigilante warning. My stomach dropped. I checked my doorbell cam, and lo and behold, there she was, Karen, in her neon pink windbreaker at 10:47 p.m., creeping around my yard with a flashlight and a stapler. She tugged at the posts, peered into my windows, and even snapped pictures with her phone before leaving in a huff. The next morning, I confronted her, calmly, on the sidewalk. I asked if she had any concerns and reminded her I had approval. But she didn't want to hear it. She claimed the fence was visually disruptive, that the HOA had changed its mind, and that if I didn't remove it by the end of the week, I'd face escalating violations. I pushed back. I showed her the approval email, the permit, the regulation printouts. She scoffed, said something about revoking retroactive consent, and stormed off. A few days later, the letters started coming. At first, they were standard, little white envelopes with HOA letterhead citing aesthetic disruption and demanding corrective action. But soon they got nastier. One accused me of fence aggression. Another said my property was lowering the community's value. One even claimed I had tampered with common space, which was laughable. My fence wasn't even near a shared lot. I sent rebuttals each time, attaching my paperwork, but the letters kept coming. It became clear this wasn't about rules. This was personal. Karen had decided I was her new enemy, and she wasn't going to stop. That's when she started photographing my backyard every morning. Literally every single day, at 7:15 a.m. like clockwork, she would walk her ratty Pomeranian past my yard, stop, pull out her phone, and take photos over the top of my half-finished fence. She didn't even try to hide it. One day, I waved sarcastically from my kitchen window. She didn't flinch, just kept snapping like she was gathering evidence for a court case I didn't know I was part of. I checked with the contractor. He confirmed everything was being done to code and the fence would be done in a few more days. But the harassment didn't let up. Instead, it evolved. A week later, I got a formal notice inviting me to a special session of the HOA board. The topic, urgent fencing concerns. When I showed up, the vibe in the room was pure tension. Karen sat at the head of the table like a judge in a courtroom, flanked by two board members who looked uncomfortable. A projector was set up with a slideshow titled, Visual Pollution, a Growing Menace. My fence was on the first slide, blown up to full screen. Karen clicked through image after image of my property, zoomed in, some even in night vision. She must have used a trail cam or something. She gave a speech, full of buzzwords like community cohesion, property uniformity, and disruption of visual symmetry. It was absurd. When she opened the floor for discussion, only one person spoke, an older man who muttered something about how he thought it looked fine and wasn't hurting anyone. Karen glared daggers at him. Then she made a motion to force the removal of my fence on grounds of aesthetic harm. I objected. I cited the approval again. But Karen insisted that the board has the right to reverse previous decisions if new information comes to light. What new information? That she didn't like it? To my shock, 2 of the 4 members abstained. One voted yes. One voted no. It was a stalemate. Karen declared it undecided and warned me that non-compliance will be documented. I left that meeting shaking with anger and disbelief. This woman was obsessed. And more than that, she was dangerous. She was weaponizing bureaucracy to bully me into submission, using her power as HOA president to manufacture rules and retroactively punish behavior she just didn't like. And the worst part? Most of the other homeowners were too afraid to cross her. Over the next few days, my anxiety spiked. Every time I heard a car door slam or footsteps outside, I wondered if Karen was lurking again. One night, I came home to find my garbage cans flipped over and a fresh HOA citation taped to my front door. Apparently, improper waste containment was now a violation too. I knew it had to be her. No one else on my street got the same notice. I filed a formal complaint with the city and began documenting everything: videos, photos, emails, timestamp letters. I even bought a second security camera for the side yard. And that's when something truly chilling happened. At 2:44 a.m. one night, my new side camera picked up movement. Someone walking along the fence line with a flashlight. I checked the footage the next morning, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was Karen. Again. She was wearing all black, holding what looked like a measuring tape and a clipboard. She paced the full length of the fence, jotted something down, and left. This was beyond harassment. It was stalking. I took the footage to the HOA secretary and demanded action. She looked uncomfortable, admitted that Karen sometimes oversteps, and promised to bring it up at the next board meeting. I realized then I was dealing with someone unhinged, not just petty, but deeply unstable. And if I didn't get ahead of it, something far worse was going to happen. I was right, but I had no idea that Karen's next move would involve a bulldozer, a parole officer, and a 3 a.m. showdown that would leave our entire street in shock. They say there's a fine line between persistence and obsession. Karen had bulldozed that line weeks ago, figuratively anyway. But the literal part? That came next. And it wasn't just a figure of speech. It was 3:07 in the morning when I woke up to what sounded like a war zone outside my window. Grinding metal, rumbling engines, and shouting. The unmistakable roar of heavy machinery tearing into dirt. My body jolted upright. My heart was already pounding before I reached the blinds. At first, I thought it was a dream. My brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. A massive yellow bulldozer was rolling through my side yard. Not just parked there, moving. Its front shovel was pressed against the corner of my newly built fence. The wood cracked and groaned under pressure as if seconds from splintering. Standing beside it, arms flailing like a maniac conductor, was Karen. Clad in a bathrobe, slippers, and a high-vis vest, she was screaming at 2 bewildered construction workers who looked like they just realized they were in the middle of a felony. "Take it down. Now. Do you hear me?" she screeched, pointing at the fence as if it had personally insulted her. I stumbled downstairs, grabbed my phone, and hit record while simultaneously dialing 911. I couldn't believe what I was saying to the dispatcher. Yeah, I need police. My neighbors try to destroy my fence with a bulldozer. Silence. Then, a real bulldozer, sir? Yes, a real one. It's 3 a.m. She brought a machine into my yard. I threw on clothes, slid open the back door, and stepped into the yard just as the bulldozer made contact again. The fence rattled. Nails popped. Splitters flew. Hey, I shouted. What the hell are you doing? Karen spun toward me, face twisted with triumph and adrenaline. You were warned. This structure is illegal. I'm taking it down myself. The two workers looked up at me, then back at Karen. One started to shut down the bulldozer. No, 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 she screamed. I paid you. You do what I say. That's the deal. I was filming everything. This is criminal trespass and destruction of property. Police are on their way. You need to stop right now. Karen stomped toward me, face flushed. Don't you dare lecture me about the law. I am the law in this neighborhood. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I held my ground. She shoved her phone in my face and waved a crumpled piece of paper, supposedly an emergency violation order, printed on plain copy paper with her signature scrawled at the bottom. It looked like something she whipped up in Microsoft Word at midnight. Where did you even get this bulldozer? I asked. Did you rent this thing? Of course I did. I have connections. Unlike you. You're just some nobody who thinks he can waltz in my neighborhood and make it look like a junkyard. That's when the flashing red and blues lit up the block. Two police cruisers rolled up fast. One officer approached me while the other made a beeline for Karen, who was now pacing in circles and muttering about citizens' rights and civil enforcement authority. The cops separated us quickly. I showed them my video, my permits, the HOA approval email, and most importantly, the security footage from earlier that night, clearly showing Karen directing the bulldozer into my yard. Meanwhile, Karen was ranting to the other officer. It's a non-compliant structure. I told him to remove it. The HOA revoked its approval. He left me no choice. I'm acting under emergency enforcement powers. The officer asked her if she had a court order. She said no. He asked if she had any legal documents authorizing demolition. She said, I am the authorization. He sighed. They asked the two workers for ID and rental papers for the bulldozer. One of them admitted Karen had paid them in cash through Craigslist just hours earlier. No formal contract, no permit for nighttime work, and definitely no authorization to drive onto someone's private property at 3 a.m. You know what this looks like, right? One of the cops asked her. This is felony vandalism, grand theft, criminal mischief, possibly more. Karen's eyes narrowed. She puffed up her chest. I'm on the HOA board. I have immunity. That's when I heard something that changed the game entirely. The officer's voice dropped a notch. Karen, are you still on parole? Dead silence. Everyone turned to her. Even the workers froze. Karen blinked. That's irrelevant. I'm not under active supervision. I've completed most of my... That's not what I asked. Are you still on paper or not? I stared at her. Parole? She had a record? The officer turned back toward his cruiser. Dispatch. I need a 29 check on one Karen Elaine Harmon. DOB June 14th, 1977. Possible active parolee. Send me a copy of her terms. Karen's face drained of color. Her hands trembled. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything. He provoked me. He built the fence to spite me. He's a hostile element, a threat to community order. But it was too late. The other officer read her rights as he put her in cuffs. Karen tried to protest, then turned shrill, then incoherent. She lunged at one of the officers and screamed, "This whole street is a crime scene. You're all going to regret this." They loaded her into the cruiser. The bulldozer was left idling in the yard until a tow truck arrived. I stood in the wreckage of my side fence, dazed and surreal. Neighbors had begun to trickle out, pajama-clad and wide-eyed, phones in hand. Someone across the street started a live stream. Others whispered among themselves. That morning, I got the full story. Karen had served time 5 years ago for mail fraud and obstruction, something involving falsified HOA fines and forged documents. She'd been on parole since her release and had narrowly avoided violations twice already. one for threatening a cable installer with a rake, another for trying to evict a renter by faking a gas leak warning. This wasn't just a mean neighbor. This was someone with a pattern, and I had everything on video. Within 24 hours, I got a call from a detective asking for copies of the footage. He said Karen's parole officer was already involved, and they were gathering statements. I gave them everything: timestamps, security cam footage, HOA emails, and most importantly, the video of her directing the bulldozer onto my property in real time. But I didn't stop there. That evening, I tracked down the contact info for her parole officer myself. I sent a direct email with all the evidence and followed it with a phone call. I told him about the harassment, the stalking, the fake citations, and the destruction of my fence. He listened carefully, thanked me, and said, "You've done the right thing. We've been waiting for a solid violation. We have what we need now." By the next day, a formal arrest warrant had been filed for multiple violations of parole: trespassing, criminal destruction of property, illegal use of machinery without a permit, and assault on an officer. She apparently elbowed one during transport. The bulldozer incident was the final straw. She was hauled into court for a parole hearing within 72 hours. But the fallout didn't stop with her. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that week without her. Turns out, several members had been quietly compiling complaints from other residents, too afraid to speak out until now. They hadn't realized just how far Karen had taken things. One elderly couple shared that she'd fined them $500 for a garden gnome violation. Another woman said Karen accused her of visual obstruction for parking her car in the driveway. The board was blindsided by how many residents had felt targeted. Karen's reign was over. But I wasn't done yet. I filed a formal complaint with the city's Neighborhood Services Division and the county recorder's office. I submitted a property damage claim to my insurance company. And when they saw the footage, they told me they'd be pursuing a subrogation lawsuit against Karen directly. Civil charges were already mounting. A week later, I got a formal apology letter from the HOA board, signed by every member but Karen, stating that my fence had been fully compliant, that I had acted within every legal boundary, and that Karen had acted independently and unlawfully. I framed that letter and hung it in my garage. The fence? I rebuilt it better. Thicker posts, reinforced beams, and I added a row of motion-triggered floodlights for good measure. Oh, and cameras, so many cameras. My house is now the Fort Knox of fences. Karen? She was denied bail at her hearing. Her parole was officially revoked. She's currently serving the remainder of her original sentence, with new charges pending. The HOA appointed a new interim president, and the neighborhood is slowly recovering from the madness. But there's still one final part of this story, because what started as petty harassment turned into a full-blown scandal. And when Karen finally went down, she took more than her reputation with her. She left behind a trail of fear, trauma, and broken trust in a neighborhood that just wanted peace. After the bulldozer incident, Karen's arrest, and the neighborhood-wide scandal she kicked off, things should have been over. But they weren't, because Karen hadn't just broken the law. She'd been on parole while doing it. And the moment I learned that detail, a switch flipped inside me. This wasn't just about fences, property lines, or HOA politics anymore. It was about justice. Real, official, court-issued justice. The morning after she was hauled off in handcuffs, I got a call from her parole officer. A no-nonsense guy with a deep voice and clipped tone. He said he'd received my email, watched the footage, and spoken to police already. But he wanted to hear it from me directly. I laid it all out. How she'd stalked me for weeks, forged citations, trespassed onto my land at night, and then orchestrated a literal demolition attempt in the middle of the night with a rented bulldozer. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "We've had our eye on her. What you just gave us, that's exactly what we needed." Apparently, Karen had already danced on the edge of a parole violation twice before. Minor stuff. A noise complaint, a scuffle with a local delivery driver, but nothing with strong enough evidence or civilian follow-through to hold up in court. Until now, within 24 hours, a violation hearing was scheduled. I was subpoenaed as a witness, along with the construction workers Karen paid off Craigslist, several HOA board members, and 3 other neighbors she had allegedly harassed in the months prior. One woman, an elderly widow 2 streets over, claimed Karen threatened to have her mailbox removed by force because it was the wrong shade of beige. That woman showed up to court with a paint chip sample and everything. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. You'd have thought it was a murder trial from the attendance. People brought folders, notebooks, and in some cases, literal binders full of Karen's letters, fines, and threats. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd had it. Karen shuffled into the courtroom in a beige prison jumpsuit, handcuffed and flanked by 2 bailiffs. She looked nothing like the smug HOA tyrant I'd come to know. No designer sunglasses, no clipboard, no highlighter-streaked regulation binder. Just a bitter, scowling woman who realized she wasn't in charge anymore. The prosecutor started strong. This case is about a woman entrusted with a second chance who used her time on parole to intimidate, deceive, and ultimately endanger her community. He presented video footage from my property, Karen directing the bulldozer, yelling about emergency enforcement powers, and trespassing in the dead of night with a flashlight and measuring tape. When the footage played of her shrieking, "I am the law," like some kind of HOA Judge Dredd, the courtroom practically vibrated with stifled laughter. Then came witness after witness. First, the construction worker she hired testified that Karen paid them under the table, told them she was acting on behalf of local code enforcement, and insisted they arrive under cover of darkness because it was a sensitive issue. He said they felt weird about it, but followed through because she talked like she knew what she was doing. That quote stuck with the judge, who repeated it, almost sarcastically, later in the hearing. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and explained everything. The fake citations, the 7:15 a.m. photo-taking routine, the emergency HOA meeting where she played a slideshow of my fence like it was a war crime, and the moment I looked out my window and saw a bulldozer ripping through my yard. Her defense attorney, a tired, overworked public defender, tried to frame her behavior as overzealous rule enforcement. He said she simply lost perspective and was acting with the community's best interests at heart. But that fell apart fast once the HOA board's vice president took the stand. He revealed that Karen had routinely made up violations, sent out letters without board approval, and held private sessions to justify her own decisions. She controlled the email list, the newsletters, and the violation system, he said. It was all centralized through her laptop. Nobody else had access. The judge didn't even let the defense rebut the last statement. She leaned forward and said, "Let me get this straight. While on parole, this woman assumed near total control of her HOA, falsified documents, stalked a homeowner, and orchestrated a literal demolition operation without city permits." The courtroom was dead silent. Then she looked directly at Karen. "Ms. Harmon, this is one of the most egregious abuses of neighborhood authority I have ever seen. And it was done while you were on supervised release." Karen barely moved. Her hands were shaking. For once, she had nothing to say. The judge revoked her parole on the spot and ordered her to serve the remainder of her original sentence, nearly 2 years. But it didn't stop there. The prosecutor informed the court that criminal charges were being filed for trespassing, fraudulent enforcement, property destruction, and unauthorized use of rented heavy machinery, which could tack on additional years if convicted. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd felt in months. But the fallout back home? It was just beginning. In the days that followed, the new HOA president, Mark, the guy who originally warned me about Karen's shady behavior, held a public town hall. Almost every resident showed up. Turns out, dozens of people had stories like mine. Fake citations for garden imbalance. Threats of fines for wind chimes, hammocks, or non-regulation bird feeders. One neighbor revealed Karen threatened to report her to Child Protective Services because she left sidewalk chalk drawings in front of her house. It became clear Karen had run our neighborhood like a petty dictatorship. A motion was introduced to remove all of her past citations from HOA records. Another motion passed banning any single member from holding multiple administrative controls without board oversight. Transparency policies were implemented. Meetings were open to all residents, and a full audit of HOA funds was initiated. Then came the letter. hand-delivered, signed by the entire board. We, the Silverbrook HOA, formally apologize for the distress caused to you by former President Karen Harmon. We recognize that her actions were not only unprofessional but unlawful. Your property was never in violation. You acted within your rights, and we are grateful for your patience, courage, and determination in protecting your home. They even covered the full cost of rebuilding the fence with upgrades. I added reinforced steel beams, solar-powered perimeter lights, and 6 security cameras. I wasn't just protected. I was a fortress. And Karen's house? Foreclosure. No one wanted to live in the infamous Karen house. Some say it's cursed. Others say the HOA should turn into a dog park. As for me, I'm good. Great, actually. My dog has a secure backyard. My neighbors are finally united. And my story? Well, it's become something of a suburban legend. People stop me on walks just to say, "You're the guy who took down the HOA dragon lady, right?" Yep, that's me. All because I didn't cave to a bully. All because I did the one thing she never expected. I called her parole officer. And with that single phone call, Karen didn't just lose control of her little kingdom. She lost everything.